Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I could, I would like to interrogate whoever might be able to speak on it. There were some amendments that were added in state government that I'm trying to figure out how they play into it, as well as with the perk note from last evening.
Representative Kampf, do you want to stand for interrogation? The gentleman will.
Thank you, Representative Kampf. I had a particular question about how Senate Bill 1, as amended in state government, will affect current employees. What changes would the average current state employee potentially see as a result of Senate Bill 1?
So the Representative, there are a number of changes, and depending on what category of employee you are, the change could or could not affect you. The reforms put into the bill in Senate in the State Government Committee included, of course, taking out 20,000 employees. Those are the FOP, the corrections officers, and also the state police. For this is future hires; they will be in the existing DB plans. For current employees, it depends on whether you're pre-Act 120 or post-Act 120. For example, final average salary change applies to post-Act 120 SERS members. That is actually a modest change. It essentially says, we'll look at your final average salary over the current law of 3 years without overtime or 5 years with overtime, and whichever is higher, that will be the impact of that. So whichever is higher, whichever is better for the employee. For post-Act 120 SERS employees, there is a cap of $118,000. That's the Social Security wage base for compensation. But those individuals who exceed the $118,000 compensation, they will also be eligible to go into the cash balance and to the DC plan for wages above $118,000, and they can make voluntary contributions to that if they like. There's also a shared gain provision for those individuals. In other words, if the market performs well and so the systems perform well, the contribution rates of the post-Act 120 SERS employees will actually go down. So those are some of the examples for post-Act 120. For pre-Act 120, those individuals have the option for, right, where they can take out the lump sum if they would like. The post-Act 120 employees do not have that. That benefit will be changed, but only going forward for future days of service. And fundamentally what that means is right now the notion of option 4 neutrality is, if we don't make this change, if you take I'll take my annuity for every year and I won't take out the lump sum, let's say you would get over the life of your retirement $300,000 in combined money, right? You know, each year, let's say that was, you know, $20,000, but over your retirement life, it would be a total of $300,000. Right now, if you take the lump sum, your annuity, your yearly payment is lower, but you end up with the lump sum and your yearly annuity. Instead of that $300,000 over your lifetime, you get $340,000. And it's really not supposed to work out that way. That's actuarially not neutral. So for future days of service, the pre-Act 120 employees will have a neutral option 4 piece of their overall option 4 right. They will also have the final average salary that I just described, that component of the reform. Although any police who have DeLauro benefits will not be affected by that because the case law says that theirs is the final best year, I believe, plus overtime. And the pre-Act 120 SERS employees will have shared gains, so if the market does well, they too will be able to have a lower contribution rate as a result of that. And they will have the option for money over and above to go into the cash balance plan if they'd like, because they only are allowed to contribute 6.25%, most of them. Some buy up, but the bottom line is if you want to put more in, you can go into the cash balance plan too. I think that basically summarizes the SERS changes.
I appreciate your description of the SERS changes, and that will affect all existing as well as new employees?
No.
Can you delineate how you break that out?
So, for future hires, if we're talking about state police, the FOP complement, and corrections officers, the rules that I just described, although there's some caveats for them, for example, DeLauro, will be as I described. For future hires who are not in that complement, and keep in mind that's about 1/4 of our workforce, so the other 3/4, for future hires, people are not in the system today, unless they had prior service, because some people sometimes have prior service and they come back, and the footprint rule keeps them in the old plan. But for future hires who've never touched state government, they will go into the cash balance defined contribution hybrid plan.
And to reassure the public as well as the members of the legislature, one of the concerns that's often been raised is that us in the legislature treat others in the complement differently. As elected officials, we will all go into the plan that all future hires will get beginning with our next term of office. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay. So no elected official after these terms expire that we are currently serving in will be in a defined benefit plan. Is that a fair assessment?
The bill describes elected officers as members of the General Assembly. So the members of the General Assembly, and there is actually case law to support this because every time we get reelected, that is considered, I believe, by case law to be a new contract. We will go into
Representative Cutler, please suspend, sir. Representative Cutler.
Mr. Speaker, I believe, just as the issue was raised earlier, I believe the gentleman might be asking questions he already knows the answer to. That's clearly outlined on page 189 of the bill, as well as page 399.
Representative Bradford, just is the same with Representative Gillen. If we do know the response, save that to argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the admonition. I'm trying to get clarity because of the amendment that was made in state government, and I'll point to the exact wording, and I'm trying to get clarity. Page 183 of the bill, where we strike out in the definition of elected officer. Now, the Senate passed elected officer to be defined an individual who is elected or re-elected or retained in a retention election in a term of office that begins after December 31, 2015, as a member of this General Assembly. Now, I believe there was an amendment by, I believe it was Chairman Metcalf. I believe it may have been Amendment 2716. It was the 12th amendment, I believe, issued on that day. It struck or retained in a retention election. Now, obviously, no member of the General Assembly stands for retention. So what was the purpose and what is the effect of striking that language?
You want to take it?
Representative Cutler for a point of order.
No, actually, Mr. Speaker, I can ask the gentleman's question. if that's appropriate.
Oh, okay, I apologize. Representative Cutler, on that issue.
Mr. Speaker, as you pointed out in your question, members of the General Assembly are not retained, and therefore it was modified to reflect that it only included us.
Thank you, Representative Cutler. I believe you answered the first half of the question. Now let me ask you the second half. So what's the purpose of striking it, and what is the effect?
Representative Cutler, in response.
Mr. Speaker, the purpose was to strike out any language that was inconsistent. And again, since we stand for election and re-election, those are the two terms that describe legislators, and the retained was subsequently removed in committee.
Yeah. Thank you again, Mr. Whip. Let me point out a couple pages. Page 183, obviously, line 14 defines elected officer. Then you go to page 203, line 16, which talks about mandatory and optional membership in the system and the participating plan, meaning the new DC plan. Then you can go to page 205, I believe that's line 9. You realize if you read them together, it would have the combined effect to potentially carve certain selected members of the SIRS class out of the new DC plan. And obviously, there was an assurance given that all elected officers and officials would be treated the same when their terms expire. There was an amendment in state government. Now, I realize the state government process was not as lengthy as some would have liked. But what is now the effect of this language? It would seem that if you read them together, we've carved out a certain group of state officials.
Representative Kampf has indicated he will stand for your interrogation. Representative Kampf.
In fairness, there's two of them. There's only one of me.
Mr. Speaker, the bill as it was considered in the State Government Committee prior to any amendments defined an elected officer as an individual who is elected, re-elected, or retained in a retention election to a term of office that begins after December 31st, 2015, as a member of the General Assembly. Because it says as a member of the General Assembly, and then if you turn to page 399 of that particular printer's number, the bill also again refers to members of the General Assembly. The bill as drafted and as before the State Government Committee limited the re-election change to members of the General Assembly. The amendment simply took out the nonsensical language retention because retention doesn't apply to us. However, all new elected officers, like a judge, somebody who runs for election for the first time after the effect of the bill, is to go into the hybrid plan.
Okay, so judges will also be placed into the new DC plan upon election, just like us. Is that accurate?
I said a new judge.
Well, that's an interesting question because I'm not a new state representative when I'm reelected, but judges are retained. And when we strike this language, I hope we're not trying to be cute. And I hope what we're doing is treating all state officials the same. So when we strike this language via amendment and we change the will of the Senate...
If I might, are you on the bill?
No, it's a question.
Okay.
Will the judiciary, as a consequence, be treated differently upon retention? Because that's the language you're saying is being struck, and you're saying it was a typo. It would seem as though it gives legal effect to a different class of state employee.